there are different ways that we can deal with it depending on what the situation is. Most things that you go to tribunal for at the moment are going to be bond claims. That's the normal run of the mill. And then what to do around bond claims and how you get a money order, and then what do you do with the money order and all those sorts of things. There's a process to each scenario. But I think as time goes on with our legislation changes, property managers are going to need to go to tribunal more often. And it is part of our role to do that. It's not something that solicitors should be doing, apart from the fact that I do know there are solicitors that are stepping into this space because the litigation is catching up with us quicker than we can blink. So it's just going to be an area moving forward that I think most property managers are going to have to become more diligent at. And hopefully I can give them a bit of training moving forward that just helps them go to tribunal in a confident manner so that they don't feel intimidated in that process. It's not meant to be like that. And I just think people haven't concentrated on that kind of training because they do try and avoid it in the past. And moving forward, I don't think that they will be able to avoid it all of the time.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Property Management Podcast. Thank you so much for having me in your ears. I'm recording this episode from my hotel room in Townsville. I'm up here watching both of my sons play rugby league games tomorrow night. So I'm super excited. So if the sound quality is a little bit off, then please know that it is just being recorded on my laptop without my usual equipment. But hey, that's the beauty of podcasts and being able to work from home and work from anywhere. Pick up your laptop and you can start recording from anywhere. So this is a really great episode, and it's one of my favorite people that is joining me on this episode. And for anyone that's been to tribunal or one of the other NCATs, the NCAT, QCAT, SCAT, WA cat, I don't know what they're all called, but let's just call them tribunals. They can be terrifying, right? And, you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach when a tribunal date lands in your inbox. Straight away, your mind starts racing. Have I got everything together? Are my file notes detailed enough? Did I document that conversation properly? Or was it just a phone call I trusted would be fine at the time? You start pulling together evidence at 9 o'clock at night, second guessing every decision you made on that file for the last 6 months, because suddenly it all matters. And then you stand up in that room and your heart's pounding. If you're anything like me, you start sweating profusely, hoping you've covered everything, wondering if one tiny missed detail is going to cost your landlord the outcome that they deserve. And if you've ever felt that particular kind of anxiety, you are not alone. I hear it from property managers every single week. And tribunals are one of those parts of the job that nobody really trains you for. You learn it the hard way, usually by making a mistake, getting caught out at the tribunal, and then you carry that fear into every single hearing after that. And if you're nodding your head to this, believe me, that was my exact journey as well. So my guest today, I've brought on the expert. This is not my forte. I avoided tribunal like it was the plague. I think I've only went maybe 5, 6, 7 times. I'm not sure. It wasn't many times at all. So my guest today is an expert in this space. It's Christine Rengger. She started out in the industry back in the early 90s, working her way up from receptionist to leasing consultant to property manager to senior property manager, and eventually earning her own real estate license and running her own agency. Over that time, she's managed rent rolls ranging from 100 properties to well over 1,000, and built a reputation for having an unrivaled grasp of the legislation and everything that comes with preparing for standing in front of that tribunal. She's so respected in this space that she's contracted to the REI NSW as a trainer and assessor, teaching other agents this exact skill set. Last year, Christine excitingly sold her rent roll, and instead of stepping away from the industry, she is one of the most passionate people I know about this industry. She's taken all of that hard-won tribunal knowledge and turned it into helping property managers and business owners prepare properly so that tribunal stops being the thing that keeps you up at night and starts being something that you can actually walk into with confidence. Today, we're talking about surviving tribunal anxiety, what it really takes to prepare well, what most property managers get wrong, and how to walk into that room calm instead of scrambling the night before. So let's dive on in. Christine, welcome to the Property Management Podcast again. You are no stranger, but you're stepping in here in a little bit of a different capacity now. So give us a little bit of a life update. What's happened since the last time we caught up?
Yes, so I sold my rent roll at the end of last year, 2025. It was time to move out of that space after some fairly challenging times. And I have had a very big break and done not much for a while. And now I've moved into some NCAT training and consultancy. I feel like there's a really big hole in training around our tribunal processes. So I've decided to work in that space, helping property managers to deliver confident and well-prepared hearings for tribunal so that they can get better outcomes for their landlord clients.
Amazing. I sold my rent roll as well last year.
Yeah.
Actually, no, oh gosh, 2025 was only last year.
It
So yeah, and I had initially I couldn't wait to get rid of it, to be fair, and I had a challenging period very similar to yourself.
Yeah.
But I don't know, with a bit of hindsight, I've actually started missing that recurring income. I didn't, it's hard to rebuild that recurring income and the relationships with the clients as well, having that volume of clients to support. So yeah, I don't know. Have you had any regrets or yeah?
No regrets for selling the rent roll. It was time for me to move on. I had tried to do that once previously and it just didn't work out. So this time I knew it was definitely time for me to move out of that space. I absolutely love property management, but 35 years frontline, it was time for me to take a breather. So I do agree the recurring income is a big part of it. That is something to miss. However, I also think that after that length of time, I think you become a little more selfish in time for yourself and you grow a little bit and realize that maybe all the things you thought you wanted weren't necessarily what you wanted. So I went through a big personal growth period as well as a business growth period. So for me, I thought I would miss it. In fact, everybody I've spoken to said to me, "You'll miss it so much, Chrissy. You'll be back working by the beginning of the year." And I've actually done completely the opposite, which has shocked me because I've been very happy not to be frontline, as I call it. I still love the industry and I'm very passionate about it, but I just don't want to be on the front line anymore. I feel like I've done that. I need to move on and challenge myself in other areas.
And what a perfect space for you to be supporting the industry in. The
Yeah.
queen of the tribunal, I like to call you. And I have seen your work in action, helping a mutual client. So tell me, what is the gap you feel is missing in the industry around this tribunal training? Because
Yep.
for me personally, I avoided it like the plague.
Yes.
I always think property management, you've got to be street smart. You've got to have that, and you've got to have good negotiation skills. You've got to understand the legislation. And if you've got those three skill sets, you can pretty much avoid tribunal.
Yeah.
But there is a big gap in training in this industry.
There is. And I think it's come about that essentially everybody that works in real estate is busy doing what they do. Salespeople are busy being salespeople. property managers are busy being property managers. And tribunal tends to be that one area where you're right, everybody avoids it. But as time goes on, we're going to need to be more prepared to go into that space, because it's nothing to do with you not being a good negotiator or not being able to set out the steps to get a reasonable outcome. It is simply that to work in your client's best interests, you will need to go to tribunal so that it can be an impartial decision, as opposed to you're the one in the firing line and you're the one saying, do this, do that. You know you're correct in your job and in your legislation, but tenants are more savvy, so are landlords, and sometimes the best place to be is tribunal to get the outcome, because whatever the outcome is what it is. Then the heat is off you as the property manager to get the right outcome. You've done your best. You've given it your all. You've followed everything you need to follow, and the outcome will be the outcome. The heat comes off you as the property manager. And I think that's something that's really important moving forward. Another trainer that I've worked with recently says, just don't get emotional, keep it all out. I think some property managers have fallen into that. They get really emotional at tribunal because they're not confident. It scares them because no one's really taken the time to teach them what to do. And that's where I come in. Let's get you prepared. Let's run through the basics. Let's teach you what you need to have, what you need to apply for. And then when you get there, you're so confident and prepared about the matter that you're presenting. It doesn't matter what the tribunal member asks you, you've got an answer. You don't have to you don't have to second guess yourself, and you don't have to feel intimidated. You just have to be prepared to answer the questions, and the outcome will speak for itself. I had a lady that I was doing a hearing with last week in Sydney, and it was a $30,000 claim. It was well above the jurisdiction of tribunal anyway. Long story short, a formal hearing occurred and the member ended up awarding only $3,000 and the claim started at $30,000. So all in all, it was an absolutely fantastic outcome for the landlord. But the property manager, whom has not had very much experience in property management at all, came out of it saying, Chrissy, I just felt so empowered while I was in there because she knew everything. We'd gone through the file. We'd itemised everything she needed to know. She was confident walking in to present it to the best of her ability. She'd spoken about that to her landlord. The landlord knew exactly what he needed to do, and it all came together perfectly in the end. So it's just about being confident and prepared every time you go, so that no matter what the outcome is, you've done the right thing by your landlord client.
Absolutely. So give us your best tips then. What is the best way to prepare for a tribunal appearance?
Yep. So my top tip would be you start preparing for your tribunal hearings the day the tenancy starts. So making sure all of your documentation is in order, making sure the landlord's name on the management agreement is the same as the landlord's name on the residential tenancy agreement, is the same as the landlord's name on the inspection agreement, basic things like that. Then making sure that you've got all your documentation, your management agreement, your lease, your bond lodgement advice, your ingoing inspection, invoices, quotes, stat decks, a full history of whatever the matter may be relating to. If you've got all the documentation, my philosophy is completely transparent. So take everything that you feel is relevant to the claim. You only have to worry about what that particular claim is, whether it's your application or the tenant's application. Don't worry about all the other noise around it, just what you are applying for in that application. And providing you've got all your documentation in order, you should be successful. I said in a course I did not long ago, I've never lost a tribunal case. I don't say that to be cocky. It's the truth. I've never lost one. But you have to go in like you've already won it, so to speak. And that is really just a little bit of confidence.
Do you think it's a mindset as well then? Because there's a lot of anxiety that people feel around going to, and I'm sure there's two things I want to say there. And actually let's go. I'm sure there's a lot of agencies that don't have all their documentation. Does that, and that's not correct. Does that mean you're automatically going to lose at
No.
tribunal? What do you do if you know that there's, for nobody's fault, we're not going to throw anyone under a bus here,
No.
but sometimes I've done it. Things have just got missed. Things
Yep.
have disappeared out of the system. You could have sworn it was in there.
Yep.
Yep.
So when you've got a matter where there's documentation or evidence missing, ultimately everything needs to be in writing. But in New South Wales, if you've got a tenancy, say, for example, where the tenant's been in situ for, say, 15 years, and there's no tenancy agreement because it was the owner's best friend and they'd lived there forever, the rules apply. So there might not be a tenancy agreement, but the law around tenancies legislation still applies. So as long as you can apply your legislation to the situation, if you don't have a particular piece of documentation, depending on what that is, we can work around it. If it was something, for example, like a rent increase, and you couldn't prove when you delivered that rent increase or when it was issued and when it commenced, then we're talking about a completely different kettle of fish, and we might have to sit down and go through the file and reconstruct what's gone on, and perhaps we'll find the documentation. I know everybody does everything electronically these days, but I'm still a big fan of things like rent increases and leases, that you print them off and you put them in a file, because they're gold, they're sacred. I get not everybody does that nowadays, but with things like that, save a PDF and drop it into the documents section in your program, rather than just relying on the program saving a copy automatically when you issue the rent increase, things like that, so that you can just make sure that you've got a few angles covered. My philosophy was, if I had a hard copy in the file and an electronic copy, if one was down, I always could rely on the other to back up. But we don't live in those times anymore. So anyway, moving forward, I don't think it's not the end of the world to not have documents in place, but let's work on in the office what's got to change to make sure that those documents are available to whomever is picking up the file at any stage of the tenancy.
Interesting you say that, because I think that comes down to having systems, right?
Yeah, definitely.
When you've got a tenant going in, when you're doing your routines, when you're doing your vacates, having that system, or when you're doing rent increases, having that system. And a lot of my Tasker team recently, we've been doing a lot of audits. It's like the penny has dropped, and a lot of people are getting ready to sell their rent rolls, or have had a lot of change of staff.
Yeah.
And so we seem to be just going in and doing lots of audits and checking exactly that documentation that you mentioned to make sure that everything. So I think, that you've made a great point there, that if you, and I guess the second point or the tip that you can say is have good systems around saving all of that important document, have the documentation, but then have a system around saving all of that documentation is super important.
Yeah.
And
if you're knowing that you're going to tribunal, I use the rent increase as an example there, but if you know you're going to be going to tribunal over a rent increase situation, you might sit down and run through the file and pick out all the relevant documents that you need before you sit down and apply to tribunal, so that you know you've got everything in order before you actually type the order that you're seeking. Okay, so
this episode is proudly supported by ALO. And if you've been listening to the show for a while, you've probably noticed what I've noticed. The property managers doing the most interesting work right now keep mentioning the same platform. And I saw it close up at the Harcourt Solutions study tour in Brisbane. The way teams talk about their day has changed. And if you want to hear it for yourself, ALO hosts after-hours intimate events at Mecca stores across Australia, where you can listen to property managers share their own story. So book a demo at alo.io, that's AILO.io, and ALO will send you a Mecca gift card to say thanks.
There are different ways that we can deal with it depending on what the situation is. Most things that you go to tribunal for at the moment are going to be bond claims. That's the normal run of the mill. And then what to do around bond claims and how you get a money order, and then what do you do with the money order and all those sorts of things. There's a process to each scenario. But I think as time goes on with our legislation changes, property managers are going to need to go to tribunal more often, and it is part of our role to do that. It's not something that solicitors should be doing, apart from the fact that I do know there are solicitors that are stepping into this space, because the litigation is catching up with us quicker than we can blink. So it's just going to be an area moving forward that I think most property managers are going to have to become more diligent at. And hopefully I can give them a bit of training moving forward that just helps them go to tribunal in a confident manner so that they don't feel intimidated in that process. It's not meant to be like that. And I just think people haven't concentrated on that kind of training because they do try and avoid it in the past. And moving forward, I don't think that they will be able to avoid it all of the time. Yes, they'll be able to negotiate their way out of it sometimes, no problem with that, but it will come up more often as time goes on. So let's just be prepared for it so that the industry knows that we're giving our landlord clients the very best service that we can give them.
I think that's absolutely, you're 100% correct there, that I do think it's going to become more common. But your advice though about if you are prepared, so if you're trained and you're prepared to how do I run these systems so that if I eventually had to go to I keep saying QCAT, but if I had to go to tribunal,
any of them,
any of the cats, if I had to go there, that's okay because
exactly.
I'm confident I've got everything. And like you said, it's a mindset because there's so much anxiety. And I know the first, I've maybe been a handful of times.
Yeah.
My heart was racing. I was sweating.
Yeah.
It was a real physical response I had to standing up. So,
yes.
Yeah. So I guess what can someone expect when they are walking into stand in front of what did you tell me to call them?
You'll call them a member.
A member.
Yep.
And how do you treat them? Is there anything in particular you've got to say to them?
So you just address them as sir or ma'am, like you would do in a court. They're not a magistrate, so we don't refer to them as that. They're solicitors that are appointed by the New South Wales Civil and Administrative Tribunal to work in that tribunal space. So they're just addressed as sir or ma'am. Some of the members are incredibly wonderful and will explain to you what they're doing, why they're doing it, and the process around what they have to do. The main thing they tell you when you walk in is that there is an obligation under tribunal to try and conciliate the matter first. So you have to step out and you have to have a constructive conversation around being able to, can you get an agreement on this particular matter before the matter will be heard. If it goes to a formal hearing, it may not necessarily happen that same day. It will be postponed to another day, which means you'll have to go back. So if you get an agreement with your tenant, the tribunal member can make that agreement into a binding order, which if then isn't fulfilled, can be enforced through the local court. That having those conversations right from the get-go, even days, months before the tribunal hearing, if you have a consent order, a consent between both parties, the landlord and the tenant, those orders can actually be ratified prior to the tribunal hearing date. So that's one part of the process that tribunal can help with. You can still have a tribunal hearing and still go through the process, but you come to an agreement and it's just made into an order. End of story. Everybody moves on. With some of the other members, some of them are newer, so they're still learning the ropes and getting their head around how tribunal works. They might not have worked in it previously. So I think the main thing would be just be courteous. Yes, sir. No, sir, etc., etc. And if you're not sure about something, ask. You will get the odd member that will go, I'm not here to tell you, dictate legislation to you. But I've never had a problem saying to the member, look, can you explain to me why you've arrived at that decision, or what section of the Act are you referring to? Can you point it out to me so I can educate myself so I know for next time? I think people go in thinking that the members are quite harsh. Some of them are, but not very many of them. Most of them, they're just there doing a job like you're there doing a job. So I think a little bit of mutual respect on both sides of the fence is really called for when everybody's just there to do their job and get an outcome.
So do you think every office should have somebody qualified now to be able to help the team prepare for I'm going to say QCAT again.
Again, they're all the same, so it's okay.
Yeah, for tribunal again. Yeah.
Look, I think moving forward, I would like to say, like they did with the supervision guidelines, and they said, look, have one person in the office that you go to for your supervision guidelines and your tenancy reforms and things like that. I don't know that I agree with that because staff come and go all the time. I think everybody should be, particularly if even if they're a class 2 agent, but a class 1 agent, everybody should be aware of what's required if they have to go to tribunal, if they're working in the property management space. And I think the licensees in charge should be aware, because at the end of the day, it's up to the licensees in New South Wales to make sure that their staff are trained appropriately to be able to deal with these kinds of situations. And as I say, moving forward, Tribunal is going to pop up in the office more regularly. So perhaps in time, I know there's a couple of offices already in New South Wales that have employed a full-time Tribunal officer that will be responsible for submitting the application, preparing the file, and more than likely attending. So depending on the size of the office as well, smaller offices probably not so much, but in larger offices, yes, they are preparing themselves that they're going to be at tribunal more often than not. So a one-person expert in the office might be their job. That's actually how I started in real estate 35 odd years ago, funnily enough. It was my job to go to tribunal. I did 6 cases, 5 days a week.
Wow.
And that was 35 years ago.
So this is when you're only newbie too, because I know I've thrown a few new property managers under the bus and they've gone to tribunal with no experience in what to
yes,
expect or prepare.
And I've seen myself at tribunal, those property managers that aren't prepared. And sometimes in those situations, the tribunal members do get quite short with them, which can be very intimidating for a young property manager, because the tribunal member doesn't know that they might be new or they might be inexperienced. That can be really daunting. I've seen property managers walk out in tears because they just don't know what they did wrong to warrant being told off, so to speak. That's probably not the right word, but maybe berated might be the right word.
Yeah, or spoken down to.
Or spoken down to. But I think it's something that all property managers should 100% know the basics, so that if a property manager's away or a property manager leaves and someone else has to step up to the plate, they do so without all of that anxiousness. I still get butterflies in my tummy when I go to tribunal now, but I get butterflies because I love the thrill of the win. That's my thing. I like having.
Maybe you should do a law degree.
Everything in order. No, I don't want to be a lawyer, but I like everything in order, and I like being proven that I did everything correctly and I was fair and equitable and I was right in the end. But there are other people that will just cower in that situation. And sometimes, even if you are that person, you still need to be able to do the job, because you have to work to your client's best ability. And if you can walk out of there going, I lost, but I did everything I could, doesn't that sound better to your client than I was too scared to say anything, so I lost anyway? We are there acting on our client's behalf. So we owe it to them to be as well prepared as possible and get them the best possible outcome we can get them.
I think it's a really good selling point as well if you're looking to bring on a new client, having somebody in your team that can protect their best interests and can show up confidently.
Absolutely.
It definitely could be a selling point for agencies as well. And, putting it in your services guide, we've got a dedicated specialist.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'd recently spoken to a landlord. I hadn't worked with this particular lady, but she had several properties that she owned. And she said to me, what do you do? And I was explaining to her what I did. And she said, oh my God, it's so nice to know that there's someone out there that does that, because we've got no one in our local area that's really confident. And she said, because I have several properties, I've had lots of issues that have popped up that have needed to go to tribunal, and I just haven't had anybody that's been competent or capable enough to do the job. So she said, I've lost thousands of dollars because at the end of the day, I have to wear the cost. So I thought that was really positive too from a landlord's perspective, that they're going, oh my God, it's so nice to have somebody who knows what they're doing or is just confident enough. As I say, 9 times out of 10, it's just the confidence that you need to do it properly, you get a win, you repeat it. It's just the details that change.
Absolutely. So what do you do when you work with an agency or a property manager? What's your process for supporting them through this journey and giving them that confidence
Yep.
boost?
So I had one recently, the mutual client that you mentioned earlier. They were in a little bit of a predicament. They'd had a property manager leave and they had quite a fiddly, shall we say, tribunal hearing to address. In that case, I didn't attend with them. I talked the lady that had taken over the file. I spent quite a few hours on the phone with her, making sure she had all the paperwork together, making sure she had the hearing note sheet correctly filled out and the details correct so that when she appeared, there actually wasn't much to say. It was a relist. So in those situations, the tribunal already has the file. It's just a matter of updating the process as to what's going to happen now. So in that case, I didn't appear, but I did one last week in Sydney that I'd been following through for a couple of months, which was a tenant application for compensation, and actually went down to Sydney. So I go and attend the office on the day of the hearing. We sit down and we go through the file and put all the documents together first. This particular office had already done that, so that was awesome. We ran through the application that the tenant had submitted and then broke down each part into, okay, what's the facts around that situation and what will get through, what won't get through, what will be discussed, what will be conciliated. In this case, it was a formal hearing, so we knew we weren't going to have to say much. The member basically just ran through the file as well. And that was the one where we started off at $30,000 of compensation and the tenant only ended up with $3,000. So there was a lot of parts to that application that the tenant wasn't able to claim because they were outside jurisdiction. They were outside the time frame with which they'd applied to tribunal for that compensation matter. Most of the time, once I am engaged, I will go to the office. We will go through the file and then I will be there on hearing day. If it's a Zoom meeting, I can attend the office and do the Zoom meeting, or I can hook into the Zoom link as well. So ultimately, I want to be there for the clients or for the agency so that I can be the voice of reason in the background, but also be the prep person, be confident, answer the questions clearly. If you're not sure, ask the question. If you didn't understand the question, ask the member to repeat it. It's all just about the confidence building and making sure that each process, the property manager feels in control and that she's got the ability to be able to do this.
Anyway, what are the most common things that people are going to that you're seeing coming through for tribunal at the moment? And how can people mitigate those things? What are some solutions to mitigate them needing to get to the tribunal stage? Yeah.
So a lot of them that I am seeing are either one for termination for whatever reason, selling, arrears, whatever the case may be. Now, that's always been the case. That's not new since any legislation changes. That's always been the case and always will be. I am pleased to say 2 officers I worked with got evictions on the second hearing. So on the first relist, I had been told that they would have to do quite a number of hearings before they'd get an eviction. But in both of these cases, the arrears was in excess of $5,000 and both of them got evictions on the second hearing, which is good from a landlord's perspective. The other ones we're seeing a compensation for tenants. So landlords not conducting repairs in a timely manner, and then tenants are claiming compensation for that inconvenience or disappointment or whatever the case may be because repairs aren't getting done in a timely enough manner. So I would say repairs would be the first one and then terminations are the second one. And again, we are seeing a few come through with the New South Wales changes. If there is a termination of tenancy for the sale of the property, you need to be able to supply the copy of the contract with the relevant portions redacted or a letter from the solicitor confirming that the property has exchanged. and that we need to issue 30 days notice to the tenant to vacate the property. Now, if the contract's not filled out correctly by this solicitor, there can be issues around that. So we had one where the owner told the tenant, the agent, that he was selling the property. The property had multiple existing tenancies. It was a group of units. He sold the property, the contract exchanged, but the contract said it was subject to the existing tenancies, but the owner had told the agent to terminate the tenants on the basis he was selling at vacant possession. So now we've got a contradictory situation and an exchanged contract and a little bit of a you-know-what fight to get that sorted out. So I would just say a little tip on that note is salespeople, talk to your property managers, and property managers, make sure you're chasing up your salespeople to make sure that those little things are covered off on, because we are finding, not so much with solicitors, but with some conveyancers, they're not necessarily across the law changes like property managers are, and a few disputes are occurring around what is right and what is wrong. Property managers, just make sure you're conversing with your sales team to make sure that those sorts of that important information is getting dealt with correctly prior to the exchange of contract, so that there's no questions around what goes on down the track with your tenancies.
Okay. So can you just dumb it down for me? Because I'm no legislation expert, and that used to be one of the reasons I was terrified of going to tribunal, was I was always terrified of being made a fool of. I didn't know the legislation that well. So can you just dumb it down for me? Like, what is the actual sort of process? So if, for example, let's use an example of termination for rent arrears.
Yep.
What does that tribunal process look like? As in, you go, you turn up, what do you have to present?
Yep.
What is the likely outcome? And one of our mutual clients, they had to go a second time to QCAT. The first time they went,
Yep.
it was like a payment plan was put in place for the tenant.
Yep. Yep.
And then she breached that payment plan, and then they had to go. So just
Explain that. Yep.
explain, and then like you mentioned a couple of other things, 2 or 3 times that you have to go for evictions. Just give me a bit of a scenario and dumb it down for me. Yeah.
So let's say that you've issued a tenant with a notice of termination for non-payment of rent. They're more than 14 days in arrears with their rent, and you've issued them a termination notice for the breach. So let's get 14 days down the track. You've got to give them that 14 days to correct that situation. If they haven't paid the rent by the 15th day, you can apply to tribunal. You can actually apply to tribunal at the same time you issue the termination notice in New South Wales, depending on what the arrears of rent is. Okay. So for this case of this scenario, let's go, we get to the 15th day. The tenant might have paid some dribs and drabs, but ultimately they're still 14 days in arrears with their rent or more. So we're going to apply to tribunal for an eviction, a termination of the tenancy for non-payment of rent, and the tenant must vacate the property. Okay. So we go through that process. It could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 weeks before you get a tribunal hearing in New South Wales. They are pretty quick at the moment, but I have seen that blow out to 8 weeks. So normally if it's regional, they will pop you onto a Zoom hearing as opposed to an in-rooms hearing to try and get through the hearings a little quicker. Okay. So once you turn up at tribunal, you turn up with what's called your hearing note sheet, which is a summary that the tribunal member asks for of the current situation with the tenancy. And they check all of that documentation to make sure it's lawful. Okay. Then you would give them in that documentation a copy of the ledger, which would show the payments that the tenant has made, how far in arrears they are, and it will also show if the tenant has been erratic with their payments, i.e. very inconsistent. Okay. Now, normally with a termination of tenancy for arrears, you can normally get a consent, meaning the tenant will agree to pay X amount off the arrears plus their normal week's rent over a certain period of time, and that will bring them up to date. That's pretty easy to do, even for someone who's not very experienced. The tribunal member will then make that an order, and the agent will request, and that order is called an SPO. Sorry, I should have said that. SPO stands for Specific Performance Order. It is telling the tenant how they must specifically conduct their tenancy. If they agree to pay $50 a week off the arrears plus the normal week's rent, that's what they must do. No ifs, no buts, no tomorrow, no yesterday. That's what they must do. Okay. Now, tenants that are normally in arrears like that, they normally tend to keep going in that. There are the exceptions to the rule, and there are tenants that correct it. But in my experience, if they pay late, there's normally a pattern, and it normally tends to continue. If they don't meet the SBO, you can ask at the tribunal hearing, you ask for a relist. And that means that the matter basically stays open for the next 3, 6 or 9 months. So a tribunal member can give a relist for 3, 6 or 9 months. And they do that because sometimes it can take 9 months for the tenant to pay off the arrears if it's a fairly significant amount. Let's go back to COVID when people weren't working. A lot of matters were probably on 9-month relists because some tenants just weren't physically getting paid, and we needed to wait for them to physically get paid or to get that first lot of Centrelink injection money that was coming. Okay. You've got an SPO in place, you've got a relist for the case of the scenario, let's say it's 6 months. 3 weeks in, the tenant doesn't make a payment. You contact them. Oh, I'm sorry, I've done this, I've done that. Can I have till this? Can I have to that? I would normally go, yes, I'll give you one chance. But if you don't meet that, then I'm reverting to the SBO. So we'll go back to tribunal. So what happens in that instance is you just send an email off to the tribunal with the case number and the parties to the matter, the landlord and the tenant, and say that when SBO was put in place on XYZ date, the tenant has failed to meet the commitments of this specific performance order. We're requesting a relist as soon as possible. And they will list the matter again to be heard. So it comes back to the tribunal. It's not necessarily the same member. It could be a different member. And they will then hear that matter again since the previous hearing. So you would explain the circumstances. The tenant might have lost their job or whatever the case may be. And now we've got this matter that the tenant still hasn't paid. What do we do? Now, it's really at the discretion of the tribunal as to what they do. In all the cases I've had recently, they have got an eviction on the second hearing, the first relist. And that has been because the tenant hasn't made any further payments. Gotcha. So by the time you get to that next hearing, you might be another 7 or 8 weeks down the track from the first hearing. If the tenant's made no payments in that time, you're now talking about an arrears package of around $10,000 or more. Now, landlords can't sustain that. And contrary to the government's belief, most of the landlords in Australia are private landlords who are mum and dad owners who just can't sustain 2 mortgages and having that much money owing to them. In those cases, if the tribunal has checked everything and it's all in order, the tribunal will terminate the tenancy as of that date, award the rent that is owed to the landlord on an order, and then that order can be issued through the local court through a writ to seek a money order to get that money paid to them. Now, if your landlord's got landlord insurance, they can shoot that little money order off to the insurance. The insurance will process a claim and pay the owner what they can if they've got the right coverage. And then the insurer will actually chase the tenant for that debt. Gotcha. So years ago, the agent used to do that and follow it through with a garnishee on the bank account or their wages. These days, it doesn't seem to occur as much. It tends to go off to the insurance company or the owner, and the owner might employ a debt collector to chase that money. But once you've got the order, that's the agent's job done.
Gotcha. Which is fantastic. I have spent a lot of time debt collecting over the
Oh,
years on
yes.
behalf of clients, and I'm like a dog with a bone when it comes to
Yeah.
that. So, but no, I think that's really valuable, like explaining that whole process, especially to any new property managers that might be listening to this. That's great to understand what that whole scenario looks like.
Yep.
Then we go back to the foundations, which you shared earlier, of making sure you've got all your documents, having
Yes.
systems to protect yourself should you get to that. And I love as well that it's not, once upon a time it used to be tribunal versus just sending it straight to the owner's landlord insurance. But now it's not, it's both. You have
Yes.
your tribunal and then you've got your insurance.
Yep.
Double protection, really, especially
Absolutely.
if somebody engages you to make
Yep.
sure that they're prepared for showing up in
Yeah.
tribunal.
And then the other important thing to remember at the end of that, which a lot of people don't realise, is once you have that order from tribunal awarding the landlord whatever the cost might be, that order stays current for 7 years.
Okay.
So at any time in the next 7 years, you can chase that tenant for that debt, and vice versa. It might be awarded to the tenant via the landlord. You can chase the person responsible for that debt at any time in that 7 years.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So again, a lot of property managers don't realise that. And here's a scenario where, okay, the landlord might not get their money right now, but if you followed the paper trail through and got the correct documents and then give them to the owner, it's then the owner's decision how they want to pursue that.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Amazing. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to share around the tribunal and how you're supporting business owners and property managers with your service?
Yep. So I think we've probably covered most of the basic things there, but ultimately, if there's any agencies out there that want to look into training, I'm very happy to come to the office and do one-on-one training so that the property managers are prepared if this comes up. Or if they've got a case that's a little bit tricky and they just want to run it past somebody to know that they're on the right path, we can offer that kind of service as well. They can reach us via any of our socials, Instagram or Facebook, or our webpage, which is tmpconsultants.com.au, and just give me a buzz. I'm happy to have a chat. And if we can help, great. And if we can help get your team a little bit more confident and prepared, then that's awesome as well.
Yeah, you are a real wealth of knowledge around that tribunal. And I have, I have leaned on you and I probably will continue to lean on you
Awesome.
for your wealth of knowledge. So thank you. Now, just to wrap up the episode today, can you share a personal development tool, book, podcast with our audience?
Oh, okay. What's one I've used recently? I have to say, in recent times, I've actually really enjoyed listening to Tom Panos's podcasts. I don't know why. It's such a sales thing, and I'm so not a salesperson. But I've really
He hits some really good points. Yeah,
does.
and he just says it how it's
He
black and
says it how
white.
I
Yeah.
think that's probably why I gravitate to listening to his things, because I tend to think I say things as they are too. I'm pretty much a realist in that respect. And I just love his matter of fact way he does it. So I would say him for the time being. Other things oh, geez, there's been so much, Collie, I don't even know where to start. Trust yourself. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. If it does feel right, jump in with both feet.
Yeah, absolutely. You've lost your whole identity. And I don't know about you, but I had an identity crisis when I
Yep.
sold my business. I moved from my hometown of 15 years. My youngest son finished high school. I had the three things all happen.
Yep.
Yeah. And I
Big
think you're right.
changes
Yeah.
in when you hit 50. For all you people that aren't 50 yet, you'll figure it out when you get there. But it can be really quite daunting. I 100% agree. But this time round, I found it empowering. I half did this a couple of years ago, and not a couple of years ago, it was about 10 years ago now, and went, no, I lost my identity then and went, no, I've got to go back to property management. That's what I am. That's what I do. This time round, I have scared myself with how comfortable I have been not being in the front line, as I call it, and really taking a very deep breath and just slowing right down.
Yeah.
So I think maybe it does just come with age. I don't know, but it's small stuff, because when you get older, you go, it doesn't flipping matter anyway.
No, exactly right. And I know this sounds morbid, but I just say to myself now, if I died tomorrow, would this problem really matter today?
Yes,
Like,
agree.
yeah, would I really close my eyes and
Yeah.
yeah, is it matter? Does it matter? And I think the other thing I've had to learn as well is just doing what makes me happy, not
Yes.
what people expected of me, and not financially or,
Yeah.
physically or where I was living or what. I just carried this weight
Just
of
about you.
yes, what makes me happy, what lights
Yep.
me up now. So I don't know
Yep.
whether that's how you feel as well, but
Agree. And I agree. I think once you hit that 50 mark, you tend to just go, I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. I'm going to do what floats my boat. And if you don't like it, bad luck. It's not about you. It's about me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that either. At whatever age you have that epiphany, just do you. It's okay to do you. Everyone else doesn't matter. Just do you. And one of my most favourite sayings is that there's never anything that bad that it can't be fixed. So don't worry about it.
yeah, including Tribunal.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Christine, thank you so much for joining me again. I love having a conversation with you. Can't wait to see you in person very soon. Oh, hang on, I've just lost
Thank
you.
you.
Oh,
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. Don't know where I went.
there's
Oh,
a glitch. I don't know what's happened.
you're fine at my end.
Okay, maybe just want to say thank you again.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Can I ask you a quick favour before you leave this episode? Now, we all know how important reviews are for businesses these days, and mine is no different. If you could spare just a minute to follow, rate, and review this podcast, it would mean a lot to me. In fact, what would get me super excited is if you share this podcast with someone in the industry who you think might need to hear some of the episodes right now. And if you'd like to find out more about working with me or any of the products I have to help you start, grow, or scale your property management business, head to my website, thatpropertymum.com.au, or check out the links in the show notes.